From inside the Banner offices along the Inner Harbor, it is the Banner Baseball Show. Paul Mancano and John Meoli live on a Tuesday in June. John and I are going to talk about the Baltimore Orioles' poor injury luck, which has really been the main story over the last 12 or so months. We'll also talk about an addition made to the Orioles coaching staff and more. But first, let's get a quick word from our sponsor.
For the fifth year in a row, Toyota is the best resale value brand according to Kelley Blue Book's KBB.com, including the 2025 Grand Highlander, best in resale value for midsize SUVs. Toyota, let's go places.
All right, John, you and I have both been to a combined thousands of baseball games, I think we could say.
Yeah, got to be the case now.
How many of those games have you left with a foul ball or home run ball or caught one of those?
Zero.
Really?
Zero. I mean, as a kid, I would like chase them down like a minor league game. I definitely chased one down at Yale Stadium when I was like 7 or 8.
Really?
But that's it. Yeah. I've not touched a foul ball at a game I was working at. But one of the things I do is I always look around like in front of the press box, like if I'm sitting in the minor league game behind the seats for the kid I'm going to give it to. Because if you get it and then you give it right to a kid, you don't look like you thought about it, you look cool.
Yes. And that was my intention when over the weekend I did attend the Orioles game, not working.
Okay.
I sat in a seat and it was actually my birthday. First time, I know, huge flex. And I've been to thousands of games, I think, maybe, just hundreds, but I've been to a lot of baseball games.
Yeah.
First time a foul ball had ever come my way. And you think you watch so many games and you watch so many foul balls, you watch so many fans drop foul balls and home runs. You think that's not going to be me. When it comes my way, I'm going to stand up and catch it. I'm going to use my bare hands. I'm going to track the ball. I'm going to show off my athleticism. I'm going to catch the ball. Didn't happen. Fell right through my fingers. Now, fortunately, it was a 4:30 game for what should have been a 7 o'clock game. So there was nobody in the stands. So it just bounced next to me and I grabbed it. I did give it to a kid and hopefully I looked cool doing it. But I did not catch it. Just went right off the hands.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not saying I would try to catch a ball. I would, sitting around my computer, I would try to protect the equipment. Then I would try to protect myself. And
in that order?
Yeah. Well, if I'm with a family member, I would try to protect the family member.
But the equipment above your own self health is quite a decision there.
Yeah. It's just more important at that point. If I'm not going to get myself hit in the head, let's say that.
Okay.
Now, I wanted to guess how old you are. I knew it was your birthday.
Yeah.
I wanted to guess how old you are.
Let's do this. Even though they say never ask a man his age. No, they say never ask a.
We'll just go on
job.
through all your personal details until like
Great.
who's stealing your identity can just listen.
Can figure this out.
Like a choose your own adventure through our podcast. It's like, yeah, what's your what hospital were you born at? 32.
No.
The
big 30. 30.
This is the big one.
Yeah.
My gosh.
I don't know if that says less or more about me that you thought I was 32. Like if you think I'm a mature man, that you think I'm older, or that you think I look old.
Well, as an actual old person, I wasn't able to attend the celebration, and I feel like I remember I would have seen on the invitation if it was for 30. And
I didn't want to, plaster it everywhere.
Yeah, well, so that's how I would have known.
They
got you this nice wall for your birthday.
They did.
Happy birthday, Paul.
If you're watching live on X or on YouTube, you can see we have a nice wooden paneled wall behind us, and it looks gorgeous. And hopefully it is the first of many reconstruction updates to our podcast studio. Like, rate, review, subscribe, all that good stuff. If you are watching live or listening, write us a 5-star review. And I do have a 5-star review to read out here because I will read out every 5-star review. John, this comes from Good Pod Takes.
Okay.
The title is Yes, 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 Yes. That's 4 yeses. Meoli is as good as it gets when it comes to analyzing the O's. Great O's pod! ! I could not agree more. Good Pod Takes.
Thanks, Mom.
Meoli is the best. That's why we have him here, and that's why we're going to talk.
You're great too, Paul. Happy birthday.
Thank you. All right. Before we get into the Orioles injury discussion, before we get into the addition of John Mabry to the coaching staff, I do want to put a button on our conversation from last week where we were talking about the Orioles hitting philosophy, the hitting coaches in place, what could be going wrong in that operation. And what I should have done is broken it down into 4 pieces. We've talked a lot about blame pie, the worst tasting pie here on this podcast.
Yep.
if you've got a blame pie and you're looking at the Orioles hitting struggles so far this season, I want you to break down by a percentage. If you have a big knife and you're cutting the pie and you're doling out these pieces, there are 4 possible options in my mind for why things are going wrong in the hitting department. 1, the hitting coaches are teaching the wrong things. 2, the hitting coaches are teaching the right things, but they're not teaching it well. 3, the players are not listening to the good things that the good coaches are teaching. Or 4, everybody is hurt and just unlucky, and we just don't have a large enough sample size of all these guys healthy and together. So if you had to slice this pie into quadrants, how much percentage would you put in 1, 2, 3, and 4?
Okay. I'm gonna put the first 2, teaching the wrong things and teaching it poorly in the same teaching it poorly in the same category.
Mm-hmm.
It's probably like, it would be weird to do single digits, but like 10, I don't know, 10%.
It's a small slice of pie.
I just don't think you're going to find anywhere that is not emphasizing and focusing on, whether it's just pro ball, the best college teams at this point. Like, I don't think you're going to find anyone anywhere in baseball that are not emphasizing the things that the Orioles are emphasizing in terms of how they want their hitters to go about their at-bats, the kind of contact they're seeking, the kind of profiles they're seeking. I mentioned it last week, and it remains true. It's just a week farther in the past that, the Athletic did a huge story about how this hitting program was like the envy of baseball, and everyone was trying to figure out what they were doing and watching it. Is there always a room for them to be a little more practical as to how things go in games? Absolutely, because you can't watch how the games have gone over the last basically year and be like, this is it. We got the good stuff.
We
I
have
don't
the
think,
results.
and I don't think they're doing that. I don't think they're sitting there thinking like, this is good. But we're talking about if we're making pies within the pie, which is not something that you do. Although I'm not a baker, I'm more of like an actual, like more of a savory than a sweet cooker. So I don't know if you could put,
I'm more of a sweet cooker. So
this is the best.
We could make a great meal together.
We're on right now. We're also talking about, like, I think, especially last year and to an extent this year, the big part of the offensive struggle pies is like runners in scoring position. And like, there were a couple weeks recently where they were actually really good with runners in scoring position. There were no like hosannas of like how great the Orioles were. We're talking about something small within a big thing. I think players aren't listening is I'm just going to like cheap out and go like, maybe that'll go like 30% and then we'll go 60 for unlucky. I think it's really challenging to have the same message and the same voice for as long as these players did. For if you want to use Ryan Fuller, last year's co-hitting coach, as an example, this is somebody who's been working with Adley Rutschman and Gunnar Henderson since the alt site in 2020, since minor league camp before the pandemic, and last year was 2024. That's 4 years of, right?
Yeah.
That's 4 years of like 5 seasons of the same message. Go through it and you have, examples of guys who are, and the message works. These guys are where they are. Gunnar Henderson, has a lot of talent and was going to probably make the most of that talent regardless, but he made most of his talent listening to the people who helped him. And I think that once you get to the big leagues and your circumstances change, and I use Gunnar Henderson example there, I'm not using it here, but there are other influences in your life that are different than, the hitting coaches that you have. And there are other incentives for making money and to play baseball professionally that are driven by certain things. You don't get paid for sac flies or advancing the runner when you hit a ground ball. Like, when you get a guy over from second or third on a ground ball, like they don't tack $5,000 onto your arbitration.
They should.
Total. They should. That would be a really interesting way to do it. But they don't. That's not how it works. You get paid by hitting home runs and you get paid for power and production, and that's how teams eventually pay you in free agency. And the Orioles are in a situation now with a lot of guys who are represented by Scott Boras who are trying to maximize their earnings of like that being a thing. It's really hard to, I don't know that they're competing voices, but I think there are I don't think the voices of the Orioles hitting coaches are the only voices. Look no farther than Matt Holliday's presence just around. It's good when it's good, and he tells Jackson something about swing. It's less good when it's not good, and I think there's been give or take on that the whole time. And then unlucky injured, like that's a huge part of it. You're not going to have, gosh, what was the lineup when Mullins went on the injury list? Like basically like 7, 8, 9, like the whole weekend was like
it was bad.
And like
Jorge
Dylan
Mateo
Carlson's
in center,
playing well, but like we're talking about like Carlson, Rivera, Handley's like in all players who
Trump.
Yeah, that's not the recipe for a good offense. The Orioles offense, and I've said it a million times, I'm getting a chance to say it again, probably in like 20 minutes, but like this offense will be good when Jordan Westbrook is batting 6th or 7th, not the players who have been.
Yeah.
And that's a huge factor. We're going to get into the injuries, and I look forward to doing that because it's going to be eye-opening to do so. And we get to see like, wow, this is a lot of players who are injured. But I think that's the most of it. That's most of it to me, but I think there's a little sprinkling of the rest of it.
Okay. So if you're breaking it down, probably coaches teaching the wrong things, 5%, teaching it poorly, 5%, that gets you up to 10%. Players aren't listening, 30%. And then players that are unlucky / injured is 60% if you're breaking up the pie. Okay. So
let me clarify. I'm sorry. Aren't listening. I think it's also gets to the point where it's very, very hard to, and this would be if the Orioles hitting coaches were young, if they were old, if they had 20 years as big league hitting coaches, if they had 2 months as big league hitting coaches, anywhere in between. It is incredibly hard. In the Cody Ashley quote that you read last week from when he was talking in last August about, what he kind of wanted from his offense. Like, it's really delicate. You can't just, Anley is working in the cage every day, but I would venture to say that 0 of those days, 3 hitting coaches walk up to him and say, "Hey brother, let's change some stuff. Like, we're changing everything because this ain't working." Like, you have to, we're not talking about like, I use in my personal life an analogy of like jet skis and cruise ships. Like, I'm married to a jet ski, and like she could go like over there if she wants to, and then she'd be like, "I'm just gonna go this way and turn the steering wheel," and like you just go, and like that can happen, and like there can be a lot of different thoughts, and she has space to think about a lot of things at once. And like there's a person who's sitting in this podcast room that's in my family who's more of a cruise. It takes me a while to like I can get there, like I'm gonna get there, but we got to do a big turn, like we got to slow down, we got to do some stuff with like,
it's a good analogy.
Yeah, it's very good, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I felt really good while I was doing that in the moment. Now it's out there in the world, but like, I think these things take a lot more time, and I think it's really hard when you're at the stage that some of these hitters are at with the track record of success in the past to take and to get like to be given this feedback. I don't know how I would do it. Having coached not professional baseball, but like college club level hockey, like you don't want to, you can only say something so many times before somebody stops listening. So you kind of have to recognize early if they are going to listen, period. And if they're not going to listen, you have to choose how many times you say it. And I think that's a balance that's really, really challenging. And I think that would probably go in the players aren't listening like messaging category.
That's also an interesting perspective, because I think oftentimes we view stability, especially in a coaching staff, as a good thing. When you're getting consistently the same message over and over again, and you aren't getting too many different voices coming in to switch sports. I think of it like a quarterback who's got 4 different offensive coordinators who they're always changing head coaches on him. Sometimes that can hurt his development because he's hearing one thing and then that guy gets fired and he hears the next thing. But in this instance, a lot of these players have been hearing the same message from their minor league days, from the day they were drafted up until now. And sometimes having somebody else tell the message to you can be beneficial.
Yes.
And I also think that's interesting why the Orioles added.
I'm sorry, I have one more thing. So Adley Rutschman, somebody we talked about extensively.
We have
a whole episode,
and we still haven't done enough talking about him, frankly.
Yes. So last year, probably this time still, he's hitting home runs left and right.
Yep.
He's just like,
I think he hit 16 homers before the break.
Yeah, just like jacking the ball like up. It wasn't like line drive homer. He was hitting like massive towering home runs.
Yep.
At this time, he was also not really walking a ton at all. His offensive profile had changed, and I talked to somebody in the organization who's like, "This is great, but like, is this always like, can
Do
this
you want this?
can
Yeah.
this always be great?
Right.
And like, how do we have that conversation? Because what are you going to do telling somebody who's batting third in your lineup and hitting home runs and like
Is an all-star.
is an all-star, like, could you please stop?
Right.
And fast forward to a year later where like all the things that Adley Rutschman does well are still there. Like those swing decisions are back. He's walking a ton, but if we had to like narrow down what the issue is, in terms of his lack of offensive production, he's not hitting those line drives. He's hitting the ball up in the air and it's not getting out. They're not doubles. They're either, some of them are home runs, but a lot of them are like fly balls to the warning track. And that's something that you can probably trace back to that.
Yeah.
You can trace that back to a year ago when it was going well. But how do you, and I think to use the flip side, doing a story last spring training 2024, Ryan Fuller gave an example of Ryan O'Hearn, like, came up after the Orioles called him up in April of 2023 and was like guns blazing. And they said, hey man, like this is going great, but like pretty soon hitters are going to realize like, or pitchers are going to realize like they can get you here. And Ryan O'Hearn was like, okay, cool. Let's fix that before it became a problem. So there's ways to do it. These coaches and the staff can and have done it, but it's not something that is easy to do. And you need to have willing listeners and you need to have a way to go about them, of bringing those changes to them. So this is all just a way of saying that like, there's no, if we're extending the food analogy to the pie, like, there's ice cream in this pie. Everything's mixed up. This is like one of those mixed up plates. So like you got a cookie on there that you're like, is there pie getting on my cookie? And you're like, yeah, I don't care. I'm going to eat it anyways. Like,
sure. It's all yummy.
It all gets mixed together and it's pretty complicated.
Yeah. I don't know if the cookie is good. I don't think blame pie tastes particularly good.
Yeah. We can make it so that we are in this analogy going forward. Like there are good desserts otherwise, like some Italian rainbow cookies. Like
yeah,
you can just pop one of those. If you're like, blame pie
I like
again.
Those. Yeah.
Give me a rainbow cookie.
Especially while you're on the jet ski and you're eating the cookie, and then on the cruise ship eating the blame pie.
Yeah,
perhaps.
Yeah. Well, that would be I will give my wife the Italian rainbow cookie. She does like them, so she can have them. I will eat the blame pie on the cruise ship.
I'm glad you mentioned Ryan O'Hearn too, because perhaps we were not as complimentary of the hitting staff as we should have been for their wins, because they have had some wins. I mean, obviously, the fact that all these guys are here and have been all-stars is a win. That is a credit to the Orioles hitting philosophy and their development team, but also we've seen, Ryan O'Hearn is one of the best hitters in baseball right now. And at some point, if we're going to be blaming the hitting philosophy and the hitting staff for the failures of this lineup, we do need to be giving credit to them for where they get their wins. Dylan Carlson has turned into a productive hitter over the last few weeks. We'll see if it sticks around, but they do have some very clear wins, and we should be giving them compliments when they deserve it.
Yeah. Do we want to read what Ryan Fuller said about Ryan O'Hearn in the spring of 2013?
Sure.
Okay. We've completely gone off the rails here. It's okay too.
We're just going to do every show now on the Orioles hitting philosophy.
Yeah. He has some movement. This is Ryan Fuller in 2023 spring training on a little newsletter that I used to write before I was here with you guys at the Baltimore Banner. He has
where you can subscribe $1 for 6 months.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes. He has some movement wise in his swing, lower body loading patterns that weren't really serving him. So we've been chipping away at that each day. It's helping him get to pitches high, medium, and low really well and keep it on a line, because that's one of his carrying tools coming over from Kansas City and AAA in the big leagues. He hits it really hard at really good line drive angles, makes okay swing decisions and okay contact. But we definitely feel like the swing decision component, we can help that at the big league level just a bit more. So in the cage, we're making a lot of decisions with different pitch shapes coming in, blending it with movement patterns, and he's making some really nice gains so far.
So
that's exactly what happened. Yeah. That was the plan. It was the way you are loading is not allowing you to hit more than one specific pitch type, and now you watch Ryan O'Hearn as a hitter because of the way his swing is now. He can get to everything and he doesn't need to, he doesn't chase. And that's probably as good of a combination as you can get.
Yeah, absolutely. And it has turned him into a 329 hitter at this point and one of the highest OPSs in the American League. So he is absolutely a beneficiary of the Orioles hitting staff and their hitting philosophy as well. The Orioles added another voice to that room as well this past week. They hired John Mabry, who's a veteran player, now veteran coach, 54 years old, onto Tony Mansolino's staff as a senior advisor. And they also said everybody in their current roles are going to keep their roles for the remainder of the season. So we're not going to see a Buck Showalter type hiring in the middle of the season like we saw in 2010. Little quick bio on who John Mabry is. He's a local guy, went to high school in Chesapeake City, 6th round draft pick in 1991 by the St. Louis Cardinals, played parts of 14 seasons in the big leagues, hitting coach in St. Louis for 6 years, fired before the 2018 All-Star break when they also fired Mike Matheny, the manager at that point. Then he worked in Kansas City for 3 years where he overlapped with Ryan O'Hearn, joined Skip Schumacher's staff in Miami, and then the whole Miami Marlins staff was fired this past year. So he ended up not being able to hold on to that job. It's interesting in that Skip Schumacher is somebody who has been connected to the Orioles as a potential manager for 2026. However, I don't think that this hiring really has anything to do with that. I think that that's just a funny coincidence. He does have a lot of connections to this current Orioles team, however. You talk about the Mike Elias connection because, the St. Louis connection at Mike Elias's very early days, not a whole lot of overlap there, but there's some connection there. Ryan O'Hearn, I mentioned. He also coached Tyler O'Neill, Dylan Carlson, Matt Bowman in St. Louis, coached Emmanuel Rivera last year in Miami. And then the Matt Holliday connection, played with and coached Matt Holliday, and basically talked about how he saw Jackson Holliday grow up. His kid and Matt Holliday's kid, i.e. Jackson, were like playing on the carpet together as kids.
Clubhouse rats.
Yeah, clubhouse rats indeed. Which people thought, I posted Danielle Allentux, who I'm hoping to have on the podcast later this week. I posted her story about Tony Mansolino where she called him a clubhouse rat because that's the quote and that's the term. People thought rat was a bad term there, and they used rat as the term of like somebody who rats somebody out. I was like, that's not at all what we're going for there.
No, that's
people don't read articles.
Don't I know it?
All right, so they add John Mabry to the coaching staff, and John, I think this was an absolute necessity, whether it was John Mabry or somebody else. I think that you needed another voice in that room because not only did you lose Brandon Hyde, but you lost Tim Cousins, two guys who had been with this team for a long time and two guys that had settled into their roles. Tony Mansolino could be a very good manager. He needs some settling down at this point. He was talking to the media on Friday before, or I think it was after the White Sox game, and said, I can't even remember who we played 2 days ago. So his head is swimming, which is understandable. The guy got the job, his first managerial gig in the big leagues, 2 months into a season, suddenly taking over a team that had serious playoff aspirations and is going down the tubes. His head is swimming. He doesn't have a whole lot of veteran coaches on the staff to support him. So to hire somebody like John Mabry, I think was an absolute necessity just to settle everybody down. And from what you could tell when John Mabry spoke to the media the other day, he seems to be a calming presence. He seems to be a relaxed guy who said he had one foot in the retirement bucket and just saw an opportunity to come back to, Baltimore, which is close to where he grew up, and to settle things down, to work with some guys he's worked with before, and to be another added veteran presence in that room.
Yeah, and it's some, I think, Tony Mansolino is just going to, he's going to say it like it is. And he said after this hiring was announced, like, they need labor, they need bodies. It's not, this isn't the era of like a handful. I know everyone likes to count how many hitting coaches the Orioles have, and we are about to do that too.
Yep.
But like there are a ton of coaches that make a day-to-day operation happen in the big leagues and the minor leagues, anything like that. And they all have things to be doing at a certain time, and having another person in there to chip in and do those things is going to be useful. The Orioles lost a couple of those bodies. Tony Mansolino's trying to do as much of his infield work as he can. He obviously cannot do that now that he has other stuff to do. Talking to fine folks like us, talking to the radio people, making sure everybody's healthy and yada, yada, yada.
Writing the lineup.
Yeah, doing the lineup. So I think it can only be a good thing. I think, the experience part of this coaching staff is only an issue if it's an issue.
And I think it's an issue.
Yeah. I think, and I say that because it's not like it's not like they're, you know, filling out lineup cards wrong and like and
Yeah.
like making like moves like that are like that it will like I would probably screw it up, like the procedures of being a big league manager, and like they're not doing that stuff wrong. But I think having another voice, another person to bounce ideas off of, somebody who might have the muscle memory to have said, "Oh, this is happening. I've seen this happen 50 times in my life before," versus somebody who maybe has only seen it happen 10 times and is not recognizing it the same way.
Right.
That's a value that I think is, is exists in having another person who with that kind of experience here.
It is interesting, however, because, Brandon Hyde was the manager, and you've talked about how the manager's office is completely separate from the hitting operation as well as the pitching operation. So he was at the head, but didn't have too much say in the hitting operation or the pitching operation. And Tim Cousins was not really involved in the hitting operation. He was catching instructor. He was major league field coordinator. He was basically bullpen coach. And now they're bringing in another hitting guy on a staff that has Cody Ashe as their hitting coach and assistants Tommy Joseph and Sherman Johnson. So you mentioned all of the hitting guys, all the voices now in that room. Is that too many voices now for these players to get? Or is that just could the Orioles use this similar to how they used their co-hitting coaches last year and Fuller and Matt Borg-Schulte and just break up the clubhouse? Say some guys go to this guy, some guys go to this guy. We just have as many eyes on their proceedings as possible.
So I think that more happens like that's more of like a delineation of responsibilities.
Sure.
Like, Sherman Johnson seems like he is more in the cages, like down below during pregame stuff, whereas Tommy Joseph and Cody Ashe are out on the field working like the live BP, and someone's job would be to get hitters ready in the cages during games, and somebody's job would be to be in the dugout talking to guys and following that way. So I think the roles would be probably broken up a little more like that. I think you're going to see, to the extent there is a bench coach type, I think John Mabry might be the one who's talking a little more Tony Manzolino than the hitter specifically. But when we're talking about too many voices, there are 4 people now who have hitting coach experience, and there will either be one voice, like one unified voice with all 4 people saying the same thing, or there will be 2 voices, which will be the hitting coaches who were here a week ago saying one thing and John Mabry saying another thing. I don't think there's going to be 4 voices like all saying different things. I think it's going to be, and I say that because what I was kind of thinking as you're asking that is like, it's only bad if he's not saying the same thing as the other coaches. That is when you would run into a huge issue. That is when you would run into the kinds of, truthfully, things that don't happen in this organization. I think it's for good, but maybe you could say it's for bad. People say that this is like a very insular group and they don't have a lot of outside opinions. And I think there's a lot of things that are good that maybe wouldn't have happened if you didn't have that kind of unity and messaging and thought. So 4 people on the hitting side, if you want to say John Mabry's on the hitting side, might feel like a lot. I think there's enough work for 4 people. Absolutely. And I think there's, I don't think it's a bad thing unless he's like undermining it, which I can't imagine he would ever do.
Yeah. He does not seem like somebody who is going to come in here and completely change things or completely say, don't listen to everything, throw out everything you learned before this. I'm going to teach you my way, and that's going to be the way that you're going to go going forward. The Orioles would not have brought in somebody in the middle of the season to do that. That just doesn't make a whole lot of sense.
Yeah.
However, I do think it's interesting because if the Orioles had maybe chosen, they go down a different path. Maybe they chose to keep Brandon Hyde. Maybe they choose to let go of Cody Ashe and bring in John Mabry. I mean, that could have been another way we could have gone a month ago when the Orioles chose to fire Brandon Hyde and Tim Cousins and then promote Tony Manzolino. If they had said, you know what, Brandon Hyde won manager of the year 2 years ago. He deserves to keep this job. He hasn't lost the clubhouse, but let's get another voice in that hitting room. Maybe that's something that they could have done. However, they do both. They fire Brandon Hyde and they end up bringing in John Mabry anyway. All right, let's talk about the injuries because that's the title of this podcast and it's taken us 30 minutes to get here. The Orioles are about as snake-bitten as they come. Just as they are poised to get back, 2 of their superstar players, star players, I think you could say, maybe closer to superstar in a year or 2.
An all-star and a top 5 pick.
Yeah, a guy that we predicted would be an all-star this year. Jordan Westburg is currently rehabbing in AAA Norfolk, and Colton Cowser has made it back up to the big leagues after missing 2 months after breaking his hand sliding into first base. Those are two major additions to this lineup. Having Jordan Westburg and Colton Cowser back on this team should massively help this team's offense, should massively help this team's defense. Think about Colton Cowser in center field. The number of times that we've seen balls in center field misplayed, cough, cough, Jorge Mateo. Having Colton Cowser, especially back in center field, is going to be a massive, massive help, and it's going to make everybody's life easier. But it's never that easy with this team. It's 2 steps forward, 2 steps back. Just as they're getting Westburg and Cowser back, they lose Ryan Mountcastle and Cedric Mullins to the injured list. Sounds like Cedric Mullins' hamstring strain is mild, according to Tony Mansolino, and he shouldn't miss too much time. Could be back after the minimum 10 days. Ryan Mountcastle, we don't know the severity of that, but doesn't sound like it could be as mild, so wait and see on that. You lose 2 guys then. Talk about helping with your lineup and especially helping with your defense. Ryan Mountcastle plays premier defense at first base. Cedric Mullins still plays great defense in center. Just as you get back 2 of your important pieces, you lose 2 more. And we're not even talking about Ramon Laureano, Gary Sanchez, Tyler O'Neill, 3 other guys that are on the injured list. Of course, the looming specter of Grayson Rodriguez and the fact that he still has no timetable to return right now. And who knows if we'll see him at all in 2025. This team is remarkably injured. And for as much blame as everybody deserves for how this season has gone, injuries certainly are a part of the narrative.
Absolutely. And we're talking, we're done with talking about pie. We could talk about buckets now.
Sure.
So like what kinds of injuries are, that you think like, oh, that's a freak thing, and what kinds are not a freak thing? Colton Cowser diving into first base is not something that like you can't stretch more and not break your thumb when you dive into first base.
You could make the decision not to dive headfirst into first.
You can do that, and he has committed to that. It seems like to not do that anymore. So shout out to him for that. Go back to last year, Jordan Westburg takes a ball off the wrist. Like that's something that happens. Heston Kjerstad takes a fastball off the noggin. That's
off the dome.
Right to the head. And then there's the kinds that, Ramon Laureano, like just, I can't even describe how he injured that ankle. He was sliding kind of, but like didn't maybe need this. I don't know.
It was ugly.
He just like, it's just caught in the grass. These types of things. Those are the types of things you can't really account for. Hamstrings are tricky, but we're now in what feels like the second very clear instance of a hamstring injury. If you want to go back to Jordan Westburg as well, it's pretty clear that he was playing for basically a month, not well, dealing with this hamstring injury. He hit 3 home runs in the first 2 games, and then
he didn't look the same by any stretch.
Not the same player. We don't know when Cedric Mullins has started bothering him, but he hasn't been the same player. Gosh, not all of May, but he was not. April Cedric Mullins was a far better player than May Cedric Mullins was. And, there's no pitching through elbow injuries. Like that's its own thing. I think we might've seen Corbin Burns trying to do that and then stop doing that in a very public way. Yep. You don't, but you can try to play through these things. And I think there's a line in baseball of like, being hurt and injured and stuff that can go away and stuff that does go away and stuff that lingers and stuff that ends up being an injured list. And I think that I'm now monitoring, like, this is 2 times that this has happened. I understand all the reasons why you're not going to get somebody to volunteer to like go sit on the injured list. Most of the time, there's some guys that seem like they maybe do, but most guys do not. And the idea that, especially with a hamstring, something that doesn't really get better unless you let it, to be playing every day isn't letting it get better. And there's been long-term ramifications of, I think, the Orioles trying to let that happen without like the actual rest involved.
Yeah. And this is just a ridiculous stretch of time where the Orioles have suffered all these injuries. And some of them, like you said, are freak injuries. Some of them are just random. And some of them are soft tissue. Some of them are just oblique injuries, hamstring injuries, whatever it is. But at this point right now, the Orioles have had 18 guys on the injured list, according to SpotTrack. That is second in the big leagues, only to the LA Dodgers, who are a machine and just are impervious to anything hurting them.
Yeah.
But most teams can't survive that many injuries over the course of the first 3 months of the season. And you look at the second half of last year when all these guys started to miss time, when Westberg went down and Arias went down and Mountcastle went down and Grayson went down. And no team is going to be built to survive this many injuries. What the Orioles tried to do this past offseason was build in a buffer for themselves and build as much depth as possible. And still they did not do enough. And whether that's a lack of luck or just Michael Elias picking the wrong guys, picking Kyle Gibson instead of somebody else and signing him to $5 million instead of somebody more reliable, it's a little bit of column A, a little bit of column B. But it just seems ridiculous that the Orioles would be this unlucky. I said before the season started that I listed all the guys that were hurt last August, and I said the Orioles will not have that many injuries this year. And if they do, the baseball gods hate them. They're cursed, and we can't do anything about it. Well, it turns out the baseball gods hate them, I guess.
Feels cursed.
It's just utterly absurd. And this is a team that also changed over their head athletic trainer from last year to this year. Brian Ebel, who had been with the organization for 40 years, spent the last 7 years as their head athletic trainer. They parted ways. We don't know exactly why, whether it was Ebel-led, whether it was Orioles-led, but we know that the Orioles hired a new athletic trainer. They brought in Scott Behringer, who had served as the Milwaukee Brewers head athletic trainer for 6 years, overlapped with Michael Elias in Houston, so they had that connection there. It doesn't seem like Scott Behringer is having any more luck than Brian Ebel did last year.
Yeah, and that's the training room is somewhere that nobody who does what we do has any insight into what happens in there or how things go.
Yeah, we're not doctors. We don't have access to their medical records, all that stuff.
Yeah. What I do think, where I keep coming back to as we're talking about this team's performance and the injuries is as we're at, we talked about the hamstrings, but like where is the line for like Tyler O'Neill when he was good versus when did his neck, shoulder, whatever start hurting, and how long was he playing? Was he trying to manage that while playing, and how long was he getting days off, and how long was he playing at a level that was not what he would want and what the Orioles would want? Gary Sanchez, like wrists. If you have a wrist injury, you can't hit. Like,
yeah.
How long was that a thing that was bothering him? How long, we've talked about the hamstrings, pitchers, like I said, they're on their own thing. Like if you're the pitcher and you're hurt, you're just going on the IL. Like you don't get a day to like see if it calms down. Maybe you get one, but you're not going to get two because they need to have enough pitchers to get through a game every night. And the idea that in a season like this, and I say that because that's part of it. Like if you're Cedric Mullins and this team is going down the drain, like you're circling the toilet, like you're not going to be like, can I actually get 2 weeks to like let my hamstring heal? Like if you're Jordan Westberg and everything we know about Jordan Westberg and how he wants to be in there and how he's like, he's the gamer in that room. Like he's not going to be like, no. Can I please have some time? Like nobody is going to do that. I shouldn't say nobody. I think most players are not going to do that. And that is where, we talk about all the different ways that like it could be more complicated on the hitting side. Like I think we're going to be able to look back on this season and not just the guys missing time with injuries, but like guys playing through more serious injuries than they let on has had an impact on how this team has played, because part of the issue, this team wasn't great. I split it out yesterday and it was modestly better against lefties, but like not a ton from April to May. But if we're thinking about 3-ish of their like core right-handed hitters playing hurt and not being able to hit lefties, like that's something that more or less tanked their season. Like that's going to get a big piece of the season blame pie, like the not hitting lefties. So where, why does that happen? I think that's when we talk about the training room and medical stuff, and that stuff we can't know. And they're going to listen to the guys who are on the training table. They're going to listen to the players. They're going to take their word for it. Like if there's not like if a bone is broken, you can see that on an X-ray. If something is bad in an MRI, you can see that. But you have to take the players at their word. So they're operating in a really unpleasant situation, I'm sure, because the manager, the team as a whole probably wants these guys in there. And the players want to be in there. And you are trying to manage what's best for the player, what's best for the team, what's best for their health. And it can probably be pretty tough.
Yeah, this is not the kind of thing where we can sit from the outside and say and divvy up a blame pie here and say this is on the coaching staff, this is on the players, this is on luck. We just can't do that from the outside. All we can do is sit here and comment on how ridiculous it is. And it's frustrating because I think the first half of the 2024 season was such a tease. When you talk about all these guys being healthy and productive at the same time, I mean, you had all the core pieces of your lineup in place. And that's when we saw them lead the league in homers and put up ridiculous results in the first half of 2024. At that point, Kyle Bradish was mostly healthy. He had gotten a PRP injection, but he was pitching very well.
Tyler Wells pitching
well. You know, Grayson Rodriguez was in that rotation. There were all of your young pieces on the same team in the same clubhouse, and we just haven't seen it since. And I worry that we won't be able to see all these guys together again for a long time, because when you get Colton Cowser back and Jordan Westberg back, and then you lose Ryan Mountcastle and Cedric Mullins, and you still have Grayson out, and you just worry about this team's ability to stay healthy for the long term together. And it's kind of sad because of how much talent this team has that is just sitting on the injured list.
Yeah. And the season's, there's still a lot of baseball left to play, but part of the reason that one of the pillars of like my thinking about this team this year is that they're going they're going to show up in Sarasota next February, and Mike Elias is going to tell us a half dozen guys who are hurt, but we're going to be operating from a place of like, yes, there's been underperformance, but if the natural progression of this roster stays on the path that it's on, like we're going to be sitting here in like November and December, and it's going to feel like a team that didn't lose a ton of games and like is going to be in the same spot as last offseason, and maybe a little better because of the players that they have available. And like, that's going to feel really weird. But I think to be able to take that perspective, you have to realize and have this accept what we're talking about now, which is that this is just an incredible amount of injuries, and it's really done a number on this team.
Yeah. Well, we're going to do our minor league check-in on the other side, but let's go to get a quick word from our sponsor in here.
For the fifth year in a row, Toyota is the best resale value brand according to Kelley Blue Book's KBB.com, including the 2025 Grand Highlander, best in resale value for midsize SUVs. Toyota, let's go places.
All right, John, let's do our minor league check-in here. Let's talk about a player that has been performing particularly well in the farm system, and that is Aron Estrada, 20 years old. Second baseman, third baseman, left fielder with high A Aberdeen. He is the number 21 prospect in the Orioles system, according to Baseball America. Switch hitter, hitting .307. He's got a single homer and 21 stolen bases and .802 OPS right now. Signed out of Venezuela in 2022 for just $150,000. And the report, according to Baseball America, which may be the doing of somebody on this podcast.
I wrote that.
There we go.
I provided sometimes they reread them, and I'm not like I don't really see what happens. Sometimes I see like in the handbook, I'm like, did I write that? And then I look and sometimes I did, sometimes I didn't.
And sometimes it's right, sometimes, not so much.
Yeah.
What do you think of this scouting report that you wrote, John? Aron Estrada lacks any standout skill at this point, but also doesn't have any glaring holes.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely what he was at that time. He's a player who is, and I think that was part of the report too, that like there was a world where he wouldn't even have made Delmarva last year, like out of spring training in 2024. And he did, and he was also the first player promoted out of there. It's a very hard thing to do, to go from the FCL to Delmarva. We see players really, really struggle with it. And not only did he not struggle, he hit. He's a really I don't want to say exciting, but he's like a very positive, like fun player. The limited times I've seen Aberdeen this year, he's always, you know, he's always bringing everyone steals bases, but like around the team, he's a very like positive. It seems like a positive influence on everybody. I know the Orioles really like him, and I think that type of archetype, the middle infielder, um, guy who can move around the field, who can do a lot of things, maybe not great, but well. And we're also talking about somebody who's 20 and he is improving and developing. And there's always a world where these guys pop. Like, those guys are valuable to have because you don't need the blanking on I'm blanking on gosh, not the non-Emmanuel Rivera and
Cooper
Levon
Hummel?
Soto. You don't
Levon
need
Soto?
you don't need Levon Sotos to come in off the
Sure.
street on the waivers if you have guys who are your own guys who can do those types of jobs. Like, not to put a ceiling on Aron Estrada, but like those are the types of guys that scouts are like, he's probably going to be a big leaguer.
Right.
And those are the guys that teams that have have those types of players in their organization. Like, those are the types of players they get asked for in trades a lot, and B, the type of players that they're really glad to have because you grow to trust them. They can do a lot of things well. They're positive influences in your clubhouse, and they're really valuable to have. So it's definitely, probably, I would still call it a blind spot of writing these reports on international players and the guys who come up from the DSL, because for most of the time I had to write these, the Orioles reports for the Baseball America Handbook. There weren't more than one or two that I would be doing at a given time. And, Jomar Reyes, those reports were probably really well written, but they weren't probably good content wise, because I don't believe he made it to AA, if passed it at all. But I think this is, there's a lot of, you kind of like the domestic players you're always bringing in the draft. You have like the loud tool types, and you have like the do a lot of things well, like something could pop, but if it doesn't, you're not talking about a bad player types. And I think Aron Estrada is like on the higher end of the second group I just mentioned, but not in a that's not like in a demeaning way.
Yeah, and we're also going to see a lot of these international signees that the Orioles have made years and years ago eventually make their way up to the big leagues. Obviously, Samuel Basayo is going to be the most highly touted of that group. But Mike Elias has talked a lot about how so many teams have benefited from the international market, in particular in the middle infield. And that's a spot where we haven't seen many of the Orioles international signees, if ever, really come up and make an impact there. I can't think of one.
Yeah, I mean, it's Jonathan Scope, the last
Scope,
one. That's
from the previous regime.
And also, they have not shown a willingness to do this. I don't think they have traded, other than Cesar Prieto, any players that they've signed internationally. But the reality is that to have a flourishing international pipeline and to sign players for big money and to be able to identify high upside talent, like, that is, if you want to be precious about like keeping high level prospects, as everyone should be, like, this is, I don't think there's any world where, I mean, there is a world where we probably live in it, where people like think the Orioles should have traded more people than they did, or traded different people. I don't know. But you can get a trade over the line if you put into two like lottery ticket style young players that other teams want. If you don't want to do the Zach Eflin trade for 3 guys who are playing well in Aberdeen or Bowie at that time, you can maybe do 2 international players and keep one of the higher minors players that's something they haven't really tapped into. And I'm not saying this is not like Aron Estrada is trade bait, but I think the more talent you can get to get stateside and get people excited about and get a little bit of a track record on, and you can trade from the DSL too. That is going to help this team as they try to be competitive going forward too.
Yeah, and not to say that anybody is necessarily trade bait in the organization, but when a guy's in high A right now, and also you look at the big league team, they're pretty locked at every infield position right now. So they have guys in place there that will probably be in place there for at least a few years. So there aren't too many open spots when you look now, but you look down the pipeline in a couple of years, and perhaps some of those spots open up for one reason or another. And like you said, perhaps the Orioles are buying at this point in the offseason or at this point next year. Not so sure about this trade deadline, but we'll see. And we'll have you completely covered.
Yeah. I mean, they're pitching right now.
Yeah.
We're not going to start another segment, but like they have like a 2.7 something ERA, or there's a rotation in the last like 2
They
weeks.
are, yeah, they're playing a lot better baseball all around.
They're not going to step on inside the dugout. They're 19-9 when they allow 4 runs or less.
Inside the dugout, where you can get from the Baltimore Banner $1 for 6 months.
Yeah.
There we go.
Yeah.
John's newsletter.
Subscriber only. Also celebrated a birthday recently.
There we go.
Year 2. And obviously 3-27 when they allow 5 runs or more.
There we go.
3-27.
That's crazy. I mean, that speaks obviously to the pitching just kind of falling off a cliff when things get bad, but it also speaks to the fact that the hitting has just been subpar this season.
Yeah. Yeah.
They can't outscore teams.
Yeah. And like, yes, like,
the fact that they swept the White Sox and won those games by a difference of 1 run, 2 runs, and 1 run is a little bit absurd. Like that, great that they swept the White Sox. They scored 9 runs over the weekend, but again, that so much of it is injuries. However, the bats need to get going. The pitching has been so much better. It has been light years better, as it should be, because this is kind of what we expected the pitching to be.
Yeah, yeah. And I only say that we're talking about the deadline. It's like I don't think this team's gonna be like, going for it. But you can get into it if this team pitches well. Like, and this is a bad time to go out west, as we're talking about like Seattle and the Athletics, the Oakland Athletics,
the Sacramento A's, yes.
The Oakland Athletics. There's like a month ago, if this team went out west for like a week like this, it would have been really easy to be like, oh, second inning, you're losing 6-0. I'm going to go to bed.
Yeah. We're going to get some close games.
They're probably going to be games that people have to like wake up and see how the Orioles did versus going to bed, knowing that like, oh gosh, we're losing by 6, and like they just showed Cino Perez warming up in the bullpen.
Yeah.
I'm just going to go to sleep. Like, that's not going to happen this week. And I hope for them. I hope for everyone who's watching. I hope for, I guess, me, but not,
Well, we won't see CNL Perez.
We will not. No,
we know that.
No, we will not see him.
Did stay with the organization though. Cleared waivers. He's back.
Yeah, he is. Yeah, good
Norfolk.
for everyone involved. But if they keep pitching, they will keep winning more games than they lose, and they have to win a lot more games than they lose to make the season feel like anything. But I don't feel terrible about the idea that they could keep pitching. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, that's a conversation for another day, because we've already gone 53 minutes now at this point, John. At John Meoli is his handle. I'm at Paul Mancano and at All Banner Sports. Thanks so much for tuning in. Of course, like, rate, review, subscribe, write us a 5-star review, and I have shown you that I will read it out here on the show. I'm hoping to have Danielle Allentuck on later this week. She wrote about Tony Mansolino's path from clubhouse rat, used not in a pejorative way, but in a positive way, as a positive connotation, to interim manager, and also spoke to John Mabry as well when he joined the Orioles coaching staff. So stay tuned for that discussion. Thanks so much for tuning in. For John Meoli, I'm Paul Mancano.